Can you really buy a business zero down, $1 million business, and have it make you 6 figures in passive income and do it with just 1% more effort? Just 1%. I know that may sound crazy, but in this class, I'm going to show you a model that me and my team have been working on, one that we've developed and massaged, and we've really turned it into something powerful. And it allows you to create decades of progress overnight by using something we call asymmetricals. So first, I'll start by defining what an asymmetrical is, the math behind them, and why they're so powerful when you use them correctly. For me, it started when I was 17 years old and working at the Indiana State Fair. I was working in my uncle's booth, and the guy next to us was a farmer. The kind of farmer that used to grow carrots the size of baseball bats, and onions the size of hubcaps, and tomatoes that barely fit into kiddie pools. So one day I asked him how he grew these things so big. He didn't say a word. Instead, he placed 2 apples on the table. One was normal size, the other was the size of a basketball. And then he said something that I never forgot. He said, "Believe it or not, I grew both of these the exact same way. 95% of the process was identical." And that's what stuck in my mind. 95% of the process was identical. It was that tiny 5%, the nutrients, the timing, the soil. That's what made one explode in size and the other stay normal. These tiny hinges that open big doors, these very small inputs that create very large outputs, that idea stuck with me. And today we call those little inputs that drive big results asymmetricals. From a math standpoint, an asymmetrical is a perfect overlap of 3 mathematical concepts. 1 is the Pareto principle, 2 is self-similarity, and number 3 is the butterfly effect. So let's talk about each one. In the 1890s, an Italian economist noticed that 80% of the crop was coming from only 20% of the farmland. And the more he studied this, the more he saw this ratio expressed in many other areas as well. 80% of the traffic was from 20% of the road. 80% of the people lived on 20% of the land. 80% of the money was in the hands of 20% of the people. The economist's name was Pareto, and the concept became known as the Pareto principle or the 80-20 rule, which means that a minority of the input is responsible for an oversized or asymmetrical percentage of the output. So that's math concept number 1. We'll come back to that later. The second concept is self-similarity. So imagine I take a line and I cut out the middle third. Now I've got 2 lines, and then with each new line I do the same thing. I take out the middle third of these new lines, and now I have 4 lines. Then I do it again. I have 8 lines, then 16, then 32, and so on. How long can I keep doing that? Technically, a line will always have a middle, so it will always have a middle third. So I could keep going forever, at least in theory, and it would look something like this. Now here's the interesting thing. What if I zoom over here in one part of this? What happens if I zoom in? What would you see? You see the same thing, right? Now what if I zoom in over here, or if I zoom out, or if I zoom in 1,000,000 times, or zoom out 1,000,000,000 times? What do I see? I keep seeing the same thing. Self-similarity is the same relationship expressed at different magnification. Now this exercise with these lines and taking out the middle third is called a Cantor set. There's also a Julia set, and then a Mandelbrot set, and we can go into fractals and get all kinds of much crazier stuff. This goes much deeper, and it's really interesting. At least it's interesting to me because I like math. But it's also objectively interesting if you understand it correctly, because it tells you that the closer you look, the more there is to see, just like with so many things in life. Self-similarity is around us all the time. Look at the way electrons orbit a nucleus, the way that the moon orbits the Earth, the way that the Earth orbits the sun, the way that our sun and our solar system orbit within our galaxy. And you see the same relationship expressed at different magnifications, dramatically different magnifications, right? That's self-similarity. Very cool stuff. And by the way, this is how you build a business with policies and SOPs that have what we call uniform execution. For right now, we're not going to talk about that. We're just looking at self-similarity, and we're going to apply it to the Pareto principle. So in my Wall Street days, I used to do corporate restructuring, which is a nice way of saying that we'd go in and see how many people we could fire from this business without it costing the company too much money. And I use the 80-20 rule all the time. So let's say a company had $20 million in sales, and they had 10 salespeople. I would know right then and there that about 80% or $60 million in sales came from 20% of the 10 people, or 2 people. Usually 2 people would be bringing in $60 million. So you could fire the other 8, or 80% of that division, and only lose 20% of this. And then if you were really smart and hired somebody who was like those 2 people and who followed those policies, self-similarity, then you could reduce the workforce but actually increase the revenue. But when you apply self-similarity to the 80-20 rule, it gets even more bonkers. So if 80% of the results come from 20% of the input, that means 80% of the 80% comes from 20% of the 20%. So 80% of the 80 is 64%, and 20% of the 20 is 5%. But then if we do that again, 80% of 64 is 51.2%, and 20% of 5 is 1%. So 1% is responsible for 50% of the result. That's one of the major things I want you to take away from this entire video, this entire class. 1% of the input is responsible for 50% of the result, 50% of the output. And when you really understand this, guys, it is bazonka-donkers. Earlier when I said this will change the way you see the world, this is what I meant, because you can see this relationship all over the place. And when you start applying this to how you spend your time, you can massively leverage the most important asset you have, your energy, and you can start getting 10 times, 20 times, times, 30 times, 100 times, 200 times, 300 times better ROI on your time, on your energy. That's how wild this is. It's like rolling up to a snowball fight in a tank. Let's take a closer look. If 1% of the effort is responsible for 50% of the result, this is like a game-changing thing, because it means that if you have, let's say, a $10 million business, then what took you from $5 million to $10 million was just 1% of the effort. Crazy, right? That can't be possible. That's just hogwash. No way that that's true. And if this ratio holds true, then we should be able to see it expressed all over the place. So where is it? Let's just forget about business or money for a second. Where else can we see this relationship expressed? It should be everywhere, right? Good question. So let's take a look at this. Let's take, for example, the population of the Earth. There's about 8 billion people in 200 countries. So if we take 1% of the countries, or 2 countries, India and China, each have about 2 billion people. Add that up and it's 4 billion people, or about half the population of the Earth is in 1% of the countries. Isn't that something? How about global GDP? The global GDP is about $100 trillion worldwide. Take the same 1% of the countries, or 2 countries, the United States and China, and add their GDP up. The U.S. GDP is about 31 trillion and China's GDP is about 19 trillion. Together, that's about $50 trillion, or exactly half the global GDP, and it comes from just 1% of the country. Let's look at something else. Let's take climate change, for example, or global warming, or whatever it identifies as these days. We often hear that you need to walk to work, recycle your toilet paper, or bottle your farts, and try to run your furnace, or do whatever in order for you to do your part to clean up the environment and to save the world, right? Well, here's something that's almost never talked about. In 2020, a study was done by Oxfam to study the big culprit in carbon emissions, which is aviation emissions. And they found that over 50% of the damage came from, you guessed it, 1% of the population. And you can probably guess who that 1% is, right? It's the same celebrities and political leaders who bellyache about how you're contributing too much and you need to do your part to fight climate change. More needs to be done by you, not them. Meanwhile, they are responsible for half. Imagine that, guys. Imagine if you looked at the Earth without this 1% of people. And I said to you, look, if we just add 1% of the population of this planet, these emissions will double overnight. That sounds crazy, right? But it's completely accurate. Now, I could stop there, but I'm not going to, because I really need you to get this in your head. Even if you're broke, if you just change 1%, I know that sounds crazy, but the numbers work, and you can see this expressed everywhere. As soon as you understand this, you'll start seeing this everywhere. Here's another mind-blowing example. So I don't watch the NBA. I've never watched a full game. I've never even watched a full play. To me, the NBA or sports is like news. I never watch it on purpose, except for fighting, of course. So even though I don't watch the NBA and I can barely spell the NBA, I did grow up in Indiana. And we've got, Reggie Miller, the Hoosiers movie, Pistol Pete, Larry Bird, the Indiana Pacers. So you're kind of required by law to at least have some awareness of basketball. But even then, while I don't care about basketball, I do care about math, numbers, and history, which is why I'm bringing up this mother grabber, Steph Curry. Because if you look at just the math, forget everything else, just the math, this guy has changed the game of basketball more than probably any other human being on the planet ever. And yes, that includes Michael Jordan, LeBron, Magic, Shaq, Kobe, or even the hook shot from Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and all these guys. Steph Curry changed the game more than any of them. And I've got the math to prove it. So to start with, he's very skinny, and he's kind of short for NBA standards compared to most players on the court. He looks like a water boy or maybe a hobbit who got lost. So he had to find a way to compete, and that was his big secret. That's where he found his secret weapon. He specialized on three-point shots, and that is a dramatic understatement. Steph Curry doesn't just shoot three-pointers, but he shoots them from several paces past the three-point line. The three-point line in the NBA is about 23 feet and 9 inches away from the hoop. But Steph Curry would shoot from 25, 30, and even 40 feet out. The halfway mark is 47 feet, and sometimes he'd shoot from half court. And not only was he shooting from out there, but he was making those shots. Shot after shot after shot after shot. Nobody had ever done this before, and it had a domino effect. So at first, players are just like, okay, let him shoot from way out there because nobody can do that. Nobody can make those shots. It's impossible. Or maybe he will the first few times, but that's it. Nobody thought he could consistently make shots from out there because nobody had done it before. But that's exactly what he did. So the entire game had to change. They had to start guarding him all the way out there at half court, which spread out the rest of the field. It gave other players more opportunities. Soon, three-point shots weren't just an occasional or a novelty item, but they could be used as a strategy all by themselves. So many other players followed Curry's example that the entire playbook for the NBA had to be rewritten. And then teams started scouting for distance shooters alone. And the message has been clearly received by colleges, high schools, and junior highs. Me and my daughter, she has a friend whose big sister's in junior high and has made 9 half-court shots. I looked it up, and going back to their records, their junior high records all the way back in 2009, this one girl has made more half-court shots in half a season than all 16 teams altogether made in the entire season in 2009. Times are a-changing, and this impact is because of what Steph Curry started. So let's look at the NBA's numbers. The NBA, on average, used to have about 96.9 points per game. Today, it's a record high of 114 to 116 points per game. That is largely due to Steph Curry making the three-point shot. Everyone knows, but here's where it gets more interesting. The average number of three-pointers in an NBA game has dramatically changed. The average team would only attempt about 2.8 three-pointers in a game. Let's just say 3 three-pointers. They would only attempt 3. That's not how many they made. That's how many total attempts there were. The number of shots they actually made was far less than that. But today, the actual shots made, not attempted, is about 12 points per game. 12 three-pointers per game. That statistic alone is mind-blowing. The average team would only attempt 3 3-pointers, and now they're making 12 3-pointers a game. Today, the average team is making 4 times as many 3-pointers as they even attempted to make before. I recently heard that the Indiana Pacers led the entire league with the most 3-pointers made in one season. They made 1,081 3-pointers. That was a record, and it was more 3-pointers in one season than most franchises had ever attempted in an entire decade before. But if you do the math, there's a little bit more interesting research here. The average NBA team plays about 82 games in a season. There's 30 teams. There's a total of about 500 players in the NBA. On average, the number of 3-pointers in a game is about 12, like we said. But let's just look at that top 1%, the top 5 3-point shooters in the NBA. When you look at these guys, you see that on average, they make about 4 to 7 3-pointers per game. Remember, the average is 12 3-pointers made in a game. So if you're watching an NBA game, on average, you're going to see 12 3-pointers that are made during that game. But if a top 1% player is there, then he will make, on average, about half of those shots. Even with everything I just said about how universal it is and how ubiquitous it is and how 3-pointers are everywhere and it's changing the game at college and high school and junior high and at the NBA level, even with all that increase and as prevalent as 3-pointers have become, the distribution of achievement, success, and winning is still the same. The percentage remains. The top 1% is responsible for about half of the result. We could keep going. We could look at music. Millions of songs stream every day, but check out this University of Leeds study from the UK, showing that the top 1% of artists were responsible for 80% of all streams. Rolling Stone found the same thing. 1% got 90% of the streaming. The top 1% of artists got 90% of the streaming. And I could keep going, but I think you get the point. The main takeaway here is that 1% really can double the outcome. A 1% change can absolutely double your outcome. Every ripple can rewrite the wave. For more on this, let's talk about the third concept. First, we have the Pareto principle, then we have self-similarity. Now, here's number 3. In 1961, Edward Lorenz was working for the U.S. government using a primitive weather prediction computer. One day, he ran the same simulation twice, but he got a wildly different result each time. The weather prediction was not the same. He double-checked his numbers, and then he assumed that there was a problem with the computer, so he called in tech nerds to come in and fix it. And while he was waiting for them to come fix the computer, he decided to check the numbers one last time, and he realized a tiny change. He didn't enter the exact same input both times. One time he entered 0.506, and the other time he entered a value of 0.5061. Almost the exact same input, but not quite. And the output was a completely different weather pattern. This blew Edward away that such a tiny change in input could change such a crazy different output. It just totally stunned him. And so he kept working on this one issue of this tiny input creating a massively different output. So he kept working on it, kept tinkering away, and then eventually one day he got invited. In 1972, he got invited to the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the AAAS. This is like the first science and engineering organization ever. It's like the largest group of general science people. It's a big deal. It's like the Super Bowl for scientists. So as Lorenz was getting his presentation together, he wanted to use a metaphor to explain how that tiny difference in input created a massively different output. So although he developed an entire branch of mathematics, and he's a brilliant guy, and that branch of mathematics that he created was called chaos theory, and it's used all over the place by a bunch of different people, the most famous piece of that branch of mathematics that Edward Lorenz came up with was from the title of his presentation at the AAAS, which was Predictability. Does the flap of a butterfly's wings in Brazil set a tornado in Texas? This is what we call today the butterfly effect. How a small cause can lead to a large, unpredictable outcome and consequence. Now, what's really crazy is that at first he was not being literal. He was just saying that to kind of get attention and be a little bit of a, clickbaity type of, attitude. He wasn't being literal. But over time, both Lorenz and other mathematicians started peeling back the layers more and more. And as more people look into this, the more they realize that it is actually literally true. It's not just a metaphor. It's not some figure of speech. It is an actual one-to-one, proportionally accurate representation of reality. This is not a metaphor. It's actually true in a literal sense. In a given connected system like the one we're living in, a single flap of a butterfly's wing really can travel through space and time, and it really can create a ripple on the other side of the world, which would be traveling through space, or it can create a tornado 2 weeks later, traveling through time. So traveling the other side of the world would be space 2 weeks later through time. Small, tiny ripples really can travel through space and time and have impact and results that far outweigh the cause. The butterfly effect is, in a literal sense, true. It's not just a metaphor. Here's a great example. Check out this poster. This is called the famous Four Pests campaign in China. It was part of Mao Zedong's Great Leap Forward in 1958. And the slogan of the campaign was, "Man must conquer nature." The idea was that flies, mosquitoes, ferrets, and rats were hurting the agriculture, spreading disease, and harming food production. The campaign to fix this started with propaganda posters that declared that these were the four main pests: rats, flies, mosquitoes, and sparrows. And they had to be exterminated as threats to public safety. And the people immediately mobilized. They started knocking nests from trees. They started banging pots and pans and then shooting the scared birds, breaking eggs open, crushing the skulls of baby birds and chicks. Billions of animals were killed. It was awful. And at first it seemed like a success. But what they found out is that one of the sparrows' favorite things to eat was the locust. And one of the locust's favorite things to eat was grain. And one of the Chinese people's favorite thing to eat and what their entire economy was based on was grain. With no sparrows to control the locust population, it exploded and the crops were devoured to devastating effect. As grain production slowed, families became homeless and were forced to live together in communes. Private farming became outlawed. Out of fear for their lives, local officials used to inflate the crop reports just to please the central government. That only made things worse. Beijing cracked down and took over the grain reserves, leaving little to nothing for the farmers and locals, which amplified the problem. Money became useless and quickly grain became the currency. Farmers were paid in grain rations. When those ran out, they starved to death. Some people resorted to eating tree bark, eating grass, or boiling leather to survive. The real economy was dead, but then even the grain economy was collapsing. The scenes were horrific and much like the man-made starvation in Palestine and Gaza right now, which reminds me to say what's outlawed, and the outlawed phrase that we're not allowed to say: free Palestine, free Palestine, free Palestine. Okay, now that we got this video banned, as things got worse in China, families had to abandon their children or sell them. Cannibalism occurred. Entire villages and bloodlines were wiped out. Civil unrest spread. Rebellions were crushed violently by the government. Today we call this the hidden civil war because peasants and workers began a new form of quiet resistance through work slowdown, theft of grain, or escaping their communes at night, only to be hunted down and punished if caught, sometimes executed. In the end, over 40 million people died. This is called the Great Chinese Famine, and it's considered to be the worst man-made disaster in history and the worst famine ever recorded. So here's my point on why I bring this up. This is how the butterfly effect and asymmetricals work. This is a very bad example, obviously, but it's important to understand, like everything I just said, it all makes sense. It's in a logical, linear, chronological order. And since we're looking back on it, we know that this is how it all played out. But if you really want to see how crazy the butterfly effect is, all you have to do is take this staircase of steps that we have and just put the first one next to the last. So imagine you're sitting down with Mao right when he printed that poster, and you told him, you said, listen, if you print that poster, you will kill over 40 million people. You will engineer the greatest famine ever, and you will be responsible for the single worst man-made disaster in human history. This poster will kill more people than the Black Plague or even World War I. If you said that, he'd look at you like you're crazy, right? Because it sounds nuts, but yet it's entirely true. Historians now say a single propaganda poster killed more people than most wars. It's all linked back to this poster. And that's really the point here. This is what happens when you combine all three of these elements. The 80-20 rule, self-similarity, and the butterfly effect. They all combine to create asymmetrical. That 5% difference that turns an apple from normal to a size of a basketball. Or pest poster is an example of something bad. We want to harness that same power for good. Tiny causes, a tiny decimal point, a tiny sparrow, a tiny propaganda poster can ripple forward until they carve history itself. That same force, when combined with the 80-20 rule, the principle of self-similarity, and the butterfly effect, obviously, is also the engine of the greatest opportunity. These same mathematical concepts can be used to benefit you. Same numbers that make catastrophe possible are the very ones that can make asymmetrical and exponential growth possible as well. Now we can harness that hidden power for good, specifically into business growth. Remember earlier I said that if a company is $10 million, that means it could have gone from $5 million to $10 million with just 1% change in input. These are real-world examples of companies we're working with. Our target companies, especially when you're starting out, is you want to start with local businesses, $1 to $5 million in revenue, with an owner's SDE or seller's discretionary earnings of about $500,000. Maybe $100,000 or $300,000, but usually it's about $500,000. These companies are perfect for you to double and make $10,000 to $30,000 a month in passive income at the same time by focusing incessantly on the asymmetricals, that 1% that'll double the business. I'm Azam Meo, and if you don't know me and my friends help people buy real estate and small businesses zero down and without loan. And yes, you really can buy $1 million+ business that pays you a six-figure passive income from day one if you focus on the right asymmetrical. I can tell you right now, we've got thousands of success stories in over 30 countries to help entrepreneurs go from zero to $10,000, $20,000, $100,000 a month and well beyond. And they've taken companies from zero to $5 million, $10 million, $50 million, $100 million and beyond. And I can tell you, in all these wins and with all this background, one of the most important asymmetricals that you will ever focus on is joint ventures, doing JVs. JVs are like the cheat code of the business world. JVs are like strapping a jet engine to a moped. Think of joint ventures as cross promotion at scale. One business introduces another business to their customer base. That's it. It's that simple. This is that 1% you want to focus on. There's three kinds of JVs. The first, there's mirror JVs or reciprocals. That means company A connects with company B. Then we have domino JVs. That's where company A connects with company B, company C, company D, and so on. Then there are matchmaking JVs where you would be A and you introduce company B to company C. Every JV that you'll ever do will fall into one of those three categories. A JV is that tiny 1% asymmetrical that can change everything. A real estate investor who's never made more than $5,000 a month can partner with a local law firm and makes over $25,000 a month for over a year straight. A physical therapist does a JV with a local sports club as their business goes from $2 million to $10 million in less than 6 months. One JV did that. An unemployed former janitor goes from living with his family to making $30,000 a month by brokering JVs and helping to connect local businesses with other local businesses. In all these examples, going from $5,000 a month to to $25,000 a month, went from $2 million to $10 million in less than 6 months, went from 0 to $30K a month in less than 60 days. All of these were done by people who had no experience and only by doing joint ventures. Once you understand how powerful JVs are and how these asymmetricals can change everything, you can do them for your own business, you can do them for other businesses, or you can be a business matchmaker and just connect other companies to their ideal JV partner. This is how you build a business around building businesses. It's really cool, and I'd love to tell you more on how this whole thing works from start to finish. Because as always, as we say, wealth isn't what you have, it's who you live. You can do these deals and get paid right now, upfront, over time, and in equity as well. The absolute best way to buy a business zero down is to grow it and then leverage that growth for equity. A JV is a brilliant way to do that. Lately, we've been doing some experiments, and I have a free book that I'll send you on joint ventures, how to buy $1 million+ business zero down and without loans that pays you 6 figures in passive income from day one just by doing joint ventures. And I'll send you a free 30-day challenge that you can start right now. Go out and do your first deal in the next 30 days. You'll see how to find our ideal target companies, how to guess what a company's revenue is and what the owner's SDE is without ever talking to them and be 99% of the time accurate. You can go out right now and have an unlimited number of companies that want to work with you. Just ask yourself, how many local companies are there around you that are under $5 million in revenue and have $500K a year in SDE? Businesses like that are everywhere, and they're perfect for JV. You can just do 1% more, do it all zero down with no money and without even leaving your house. Plus, the businesses you work with don't risk anything either. They don't have to spend any money. It's a win-win for them. Go get my free book and take the 30-day challenge today. Thank you so much. BigRia.com. Go there now. Thank you.